Hi everyone. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today. What we're kind of planning to do is take a look at some sEMG systems for clinical use. My name is Lucas Borgo. I work for Thought Technology, so we're a biotech company that designs the hardware and software around some of the signal acquisition and biofeedback. We're going to spend about 25 minutes going through kind of what we offer in terms of our software and our hardware, how to get through some of the kind of the thought technology lingo and jargon that sometimes we get caught up in, and really kind of give you a guiding kind of path on how to put together a system with us, and we can kind of extrapolate that out to our entire systems, not just our EMG systems, but they do tend to get a little bit confusing from time to time, like we'll see. Just a few quick notes. At any time during the webinar, you can ask a question. On your GoToWebinar panel, there is a section where you can type in a question. I'll see that from my side, and I'll either pause and answer it right away, or I'll save it for kind of for the end. The other thing you can do is you can raise your hand to verbally ask a question, and then again, I may pause or I may keep going. It kind of depends on the flow of how things are working, and we'll kind of decide on what to do from there. So I would unmute you, then you can go ahead and ask the question, and we can move forward. For the most part, it's going to be me talking quite a bit. Again, don't hesitate with your questions. Send them, and so we'll definitely get to them at the end, and we'll get you on your way. So again, what are we doing today? Take a peek at the software. What is in there? What can you do with it? Kind of how is it intended to be used? And then in terms of from the hardware side, figure out which EMG products are right for you. Again, more specifically, which Thought Technology EMG products are right for you. I see a few familiar names that are here. So there may be questions that have to do with using the products, and we'll answer those if they're concise enough. If not, we may just touch base, kind of back channel. So kind of moving forward, the big question we're going to ask is, how do I build a system? If I'm going to go through the sales process with you, what I'm going to ask you is, how many muscle sites do you want to measure at one time? So at Thought Technology, we have these things that we constantly refer to as channels, and we have sensors, and we have all these other things. Each sensor is going to measure one muscle site. So the first thing we have to kind of determine to guide our conversation is, how many different muscle sites do you want to measure at once? The next question, which is a bit related to that, is, do you want to measure anything else with it? So we have a lot of flexibility in what we do. We measure respiration, we measure heart rate, skin conductance, when we're dealing with stress response type things. And then we have this whole entire rehab kind of line of products where you can do force, you can do range of motion, and again, just that muscle tension, that muscle activity. So that's gonna be another question that kind of helps guide us to a certain system. And then the last one is, what is your training environment? So in traditional neurofeedback, we're sitting next to someone while we work with them. In rehab or in rehab, or when we're doing muscle re-education, that may not be the case. There may be some movement involved. You may not be able to sit right next to them. It may not make sense. So what is our training environment, and how are we going to shape the system to work in that environment? Is kind of those are really the three big questions I would ask to guide us to a certain type of system, and where we're going to go a little bit today. And it's really going to tie it all back into, how can it do what I want it to do, and how will I use it? So we had mentioned some of this jargon already. We have software that we manufacture. We call them encoders. It's the box where we plug everything in, and then you have sensors. So those are actual EMG sensors that obviously are going to go on our muscle. Obviously, there's some electrodes there. Those are a smaller deal. We're going to kind of talk about these big three portions: our sensors, our encoders, and our software. I'm trying something new today, kind of going away from the way I traditionally do it. I'm going to talk about the software first. And again, it's all thought technology product. I guess that's a disclaimer. And then we'll get into what some of the hardware looks like. So we have what we call software suites. These suites are individual applications. So in biofeedback, neurofeedback, we have things like physiology and EMG. For rehab and for movement, we have really two. One's the rehabilitation suite, the rehab suite on the left. The other is the Dynamap suite. Generally, with what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis in terms of inquiries, it all is going to go kind of be guided back towards the rehab suite. So that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. What is Dynamap, you ask? Dynamap is it's really a lot of signal viewing and third-party integration. So by third-party integration, just kind of a standard integration, we have our biometrics, goniometers, and some of the force sensors, or the force plates that you kind of put for foot switches, that type of thing. So that kind of starts to gear more towards biomechanics. In the rehab suite, we have something that's much more structured. We can do range of motion assessment and training. We have EMG assessment and training. We integrated objective data into manual muscle testing. We've done algometry, so pain testing, how much pressure can that particular area tolerate. And then we've also integrated some other traditional biofeedback methods, skin conductance, respiration, heart rate, those types of things. So the first part of our software that we're going to kind of mention is assessment. So when I break down our software, we're really talking about assessments, training, and then how we kind of view the data after the fact. The rehab suite has a ton of assessments in a lot of different categories. So we had mentioned kind of what the rehab suite does. These categories are kind of outlining that. We have static dynamic range of motion assessments, static dynamic EMG assessments. Those tend to be anatomically specific. So we'll have some cervical spine stuff. We can measure paraspinals if we have a lot of channels. We have, again, a lot of different types of ways we can kind of evaluate what's going on before we start I'll say the intervention. The other thing we have kind of guide your attention towards the last one is a general EMG assessment. This EMG assessment is a 5-step assessment where we're measuring a baseline. We're doing some fast flick contractions, so obviously for things like pelvic floor re-education, these become very important. But the ability for the muscle to activate and release quickly. There are some work rest protocols, and we'll talk a little more about those. There's an endurance thing, so what is going on with the muscle when you can contract and hold, and then obviously there's a post-baseline measurement. So kind of just taking a snapshot of one of our assessments. Again, what we get are we get these what we call event markers, so all these kind of vertical markers. It's going to divide up our metrics, and it's going to tell us when things were supposed to happen. It's really relevant when we talk about our work rest, because we have an activation and a release period where we can see whether there's that good solid activation going straight up and we can release straight down, or if there's some sort of dysfunction there. So we're really trying to put the software kind of to work for you, so that you can gather more information and the data that you're looking at starts to make sense. Kind of building on that, what we are able to do is we're able to generate metrics that are going to be hyper relevant to what we're doing. So our first part, we have our work rest step here. All of the metrics we're going to kind of produce for that work rest are going to be relevant to a work rest protocol. We're not going to look at, say, we're not going to look at the mean of necessarily of a rest period unless we're looking at tone and say, okay, do we need to train relaxation? What's our resting level at? So for this particular person, which happens to be me, my mean during the rest period looked like it was up near 27, so that may be an indicator of something. So kind of taking a peek at what's going on, we had our endurance portion, and we're measuring area under a curve, so obviously if they're able to sustain the contraction for longer, there's going to be a bigger space underneath the curve for them. It's not going to degrade as much over time. Again, the take-home message from this is not how to use it clinically, it's that the software is going to work for you clinically. And there's really been a lot of thought put into how that is going to happen. Once we get through our assessment, then obviously the next step, maybe one of the most important steps, is what sorts of training am I going to do to kind of bring that muscle back to a normal state. So in terms of intended use from our side, we call it muscle re-education. It's muscle control, so how much muscle tone there is, say, at rest, and how much can they control the tension levels. Muscle balance, we can look at it from an agonist-antagonist relationship, or from kind of a left-right balance. We can compare healthy, non-healthy, that type of thing. Again, we get into multiple channels. Relaxation, so like we had seen in the assessment that I had shown quickly, if there's excessive muscle tone, it may be linked to other things that are going on. If we're especially stressed and we're storing a lot of tension in our shoulders, there may be extra fatigue or things like that going on. And again, kind of tying back to some research that's been done, some excessive trap muscle tension may be tied back to something like headaches. From the performance standpoint, we can talk about relaxation as if you're holding excess muscle tension, then you're going to become fatigued quicker and you're not going to perform as well. So there's a lot of kind of different ways we can take a look at what's going on from the musculoskeletal perspective. Obviously, they're strengthening. So when we think about muscles, we think about how strong am I, how much can I lift, how much can I move, what's my contraction look like, is my contraction healthy? So there's a strengthening component, and then there's a training component, which is kind of, it starts to mesh all those things. We have these things called templates, which we'll show shortly, and we'll get into it. Some basic anatomy for our screen. The rehab suite is very good at providing some sort of instruction about what's going on, what sort of feedback we're going to get. Because we are doing biofeedback, there's going to be some sort of feedback mechanism. In this particular case, it happens to be a puzzle that's going to fill in as we stay above our threshold. So sometimes it's going to be sound, sometimes it's going to be visual, but there are animations, there are different ways we can kind of tweak the system to better fit and better engage the client. So the feedback is really real-time feedback, so that they attach some sort of thought about what's going on to the feelings that they're having. And the second part of it is so they stay engaged constantly. So especially on our relaxation and strengthening screens, what we're going to get is some sort of line graph or bar graph with a threshold attached. Some feedback mechanism, whether it be audio or visual or both, and then some sort of metrics on our screen. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. One thing you'll hear from Thought Technology all the time is everything's customizable. What's that mean? We can change what this time period is if we need to. We can change the metrics that we're displaying. We can change the graphics that are being displayed. So you could bring in your own graphics. You could bring in your own music. You can attach to a DVD instrument. So a video plays. So again, engagement for the client is really going to be maximized. And then I mentioned the template training. This is just kind of a quick snapshot. We're going to take a closer look at this in just a minute. When we're talking about muscle tone, being able to control our contraction, we're able to kind of give them a guide on how to do it. So what we're going to do next is I'm actually going to open up Biograph, and we're going to take a peek at what's going on, a few different kind of options that we have in real time. So currently I am the guinea pig. So if I hold my breath or you feel like I'm out of breath, it's probably because I need to be in better shape. But we're going to go through kind of each of those types of screens. The first one we see is muscle tension. So I've got 2 EMG electrodes. This is a 1 channel. So if I contract one side, that's what you see. But kind of the goal is to stay relaxed and then be able to control my muscle inside the template that's laid out before me. And then obviously on this one, then as we go to the next screen, it's going to maybe a little more challenging. The shapes may be different. Again, we have some templates that are standard. When we start talking about the MyoTrack Infinity, there's going to be more for the pelvic floor. There's going to be a kind of a bigger range of templates. And again, you can always create your own. We can work with you on doing that. So my next screen is a muscle balance screen. So I mentioned I've got two EMGs attached. We have a left EMG right there, a right EMG over there, and what the gorilla is kind of showing me is what the ratio of each is at any given moment. Again, in real time, for biofeedback, what we're talking about is getting that real-time feedback about the balance. So clinically, what we can do is I can take myself through a few contractions and see if one is really dominating the other one. And we'll see that they're pretty balanced, and then I relax. And we'll see if one holds excess muscle tension. Well, it looks like it's happening a little bit on my right-hand side. And then we'll do it again on 3, 2, 1. And relax. So again, muscle balance, we can change the speed of the animation so it slows down a bit. But it's really just going to be about the real-time feedback. Kind of moving forward, this is a relaxation screen. Kind of a goofy animation that could be fun. And then there should be some audio. There's some audio feedback that's coming through when I'm in condition. So we'll see that both sides are relaxed. I don't expect too much dysfunction in these muscles, but if I contract, we're going to get some immediate feedback. Our green light's going to turn off. The heads are going to kind of change sizes until I kind of release those muscle contractions. Kind of another thing. So we have dual thresholds. What the research tells us is that a relaxed muscle is below 5, but you can set it to gradually go down. So you're able to control the threshold so that the client's working towards something attainable all of the time. The other thing that's kind of new on this one is our epoch graphs. So it kind of gives us a trend of what's going on over time. So we had mentioned that we do have strengthening type activities. We have an orange threshold bar again here. If I'm above threshold on channel A and below threshold on channel B, I'm going to start to get my animation. And so what this may be kind of used for is an agonist-antagonist relationship. If I'm getting contraction on both sides, there's probably some restriction on movement. So we can work to get the guy to move while relaxing that alternate channel. And then you get to turn into Thought Technologies' version of Superman. And then obviously when you drop below threshold, it kind of resets. So from the clinical side, what that means is they're going to be constantly working to, they're going to be able to work and then rest and then work and then rest. And if the guy is not going to stay changed the entire time. So now if I start to contract again, we'll say do 5 seconds and relax. And I do another contraction. And relax. So you can work rest. It's going to be constantly challenging and engaging, again, for the clients. So we've kind of just covered already control, balance, relaxation, strengthening, and the last one was the training. The training is going to be kind of much more general in nature. There's not going to be a lot of feedback involved besides the screens and some sounds. So again, we have our instructions. It says we're going to have different types of music playing when we're above threshold. And then obviously as one state, I get feedback on one side and not the other. And then none if I'm below threshold on both sides. This is going to work towards both sides. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of what the software really looks like in real time. Some of the feedback that we get. We didn't go too much, and we didn't go too heavy on the feature side of things. But obviously, if we have questions about what we're able to do within the software, if we can change, say, the speed of the signal. So one thing that we get quite often in EMG is these numbers are very difficult to follow. We can damper those and slow those down so they're a little easier to track in real time. It's not going to disrupt the raw data we're collecting. One thing we've done well over time is protect our raw data. So you're always going to be able to go back and look at it and take a peek at really what's going on. So kind of going back to our slides, once we get done with training, the next important thing is going to be reports. So what kind of reports do we have available to us? One that is kind of a quick way for us to assess what happened during the session, and two, that kind of gives us a snapshot that we can show the client and have something to discuss. The report you see on the screen now is for the manual muscle testing. So traditionally, manual muscle testing has these grades from 1 to 5 that correspond with different abilities to actually move around the joint. What we're able to do is we're able to still kind of maintain those grades. We're able to fill that in on the report. We're able to identify which, what type of movement we're dealing with, and it's going to give us the information in terms of how much force was produced around that movement and how we kind of summarize it. So that's an example of what we call an Excel report. It comes standard in the rehab suite for the ProConf Infinity. If we don't understand what that is yet, we'll get to it. But it is a standard package. And it also shows you, again, when we talk about the customizable portion, if there's something that's going to be valuable to report to your clients on a day-to-day basis that we want to be able to report, we're able to do it. So we're all for working with you to get the tool to work kind of the way you see it in your mind. And we have different avenues that we can go down to address that. So that let me take a step back. The other type of report that we have is an open session report. So with that assessment we had, I generated this report where you get some fine information, some notes that you could put down, but then you get the statistics kind of separated out by activity if we're in a script, or just kind of by overall statistics if we're not in a script, if we're in an open display session, so we can really take a look at what went on. Few nuances here. Because we're talking about EMG, if we're doing a 30-minute session, obviously for strengthening it can be contracted for 30 minutes at a time. So for an open display session, we can separate the data from between work periods and rest periods. So when we look at our metrics, when we look at our statistics, they really make sense. And then we'll notice kind of a difference between the two here are the simplicity of this one just being a table of metrics, and this one having our different activities with our table of metrics, and then also our signals. So we're able to, when we review a screen, we're able to take those raw signals and put them into a report that we can proceed to kind of put into their file. Quick and easy to generate a report like this literally takes 30 seconds. So you're going into the review screen, you hit a button, you select a few options, and out comes this report. So one thing we've been working on a lot in the recent months has been to increase the offerings we have for the reporting side, because there is value to it, and so trying to identify what that value is, what we're really trying to do with each kind of training session or training category, and generating reports that are going to kind of line up with that. So that's kind of our software in a nutshell. Again, really 3 big components: assessments, training, reporting. So what's going on with the muscle? what are we doing about it, and then how are we going to take a look at it and see that what we're doing is working or not working. So I'll say very linear in nature, very scientific. It has to do with the nature of some of what we're measuring. It also has to do with being able to validate what we're doing, be able to provide that objective, quantifiable data to the work that we're doing. Mostly we start talking about our different units. We have pelvic floor protocols, we have general EMG protocols, and then we have things that are more specific like this manual muscle testing, like our range of motion assessment, that type of thing. So equipment. When we look at thought technology equipment, we get this big pile and we say, oh no, I just want to measure EMG. How do I kind of parse all of this out? So we get this big pile of equipment that we don't really know what to do with. If we kind of go back to that original model I showed where we have the sensor and encoder and software, it begins to make more sense. We're going to have some things that are going to plug into our encoder, and that's going to connect and run on some sort of software. With EMG, we have a few different things going on. We have what we call our ProComp Infinity series, which is where I just did the assessment, where we're able to measure EMG, range of motion, muscle force, and then other kind of peripheral measures. We also have a few EMG-only units, which we'll talk about. That's our MyoTrack Infinity line. And instead of having these sensors externally, they're going to be built into the unit themselves. That's what that internal means. And then we also have a few home devices that are going to be geared towards home EMG use or home pelvic floor rehab. So we'll get into that a bit. The first thing that jumps out at me when I look at our product line is we see this. We see MyoScan, MyoScan Pro, MyoScan Z. What do all these things mean? So what is with all of the MyoScans? And it really comes down, some of it's technical in terms of the building of the products. Other of it is how it's applied. But we really have two kinds of MyoScan sensors. We have a MyoScan Pro and then the MyoScan Flex or Z. The MyoScan Pro was designed to work on slower channels, so the sampling rate is not as high. Because the sampling rate is not as high, we have to do something with the signal before it gets into the software, because it's not fast enough to produce the raw signal we need for muscle tension. In terms of the clinical side of it, in traditional biofeedback where they're dealing with muscle tension, anxiety response, there wasn't a need for raw EMG, so this kind of does the job. And a lot of it is what we're really used to seeing when we think about that sharp activation, that sharp release. That's RMS output. That's what the MyoScan Pro does. We do when we're kind of looking at the MyoScan Pro, something to keep in mind, we have two different kinds. We have a 50 hertz and a 60 hertz version depending on your location. So generally our North American customers are going to be on 60 hertz. When we start going overseas and connecting with distributors, it may be a 50 hertz purchase. So we do have different types. Again, small technical notes, but things that may confuse people, that people will make mistakes. They'll go online and they'll buy the wrong type of sensor. The MyoScan Pro, again, it's going to connect with our ProComp Infinity line, ProComp 2, ProComp Infinity, ProComp 5. Each will have slots for two of those, so that's two muscle sites of measurement. Kind of backtracking a bit into our software, with the 10-channel system, we can measure up to 10 muscle sites of raw. With the 2, 5, or 8-channel system, or with the 2-channel system, we're 2 sites obviously, and then with the 5 or the 8, we're looking at 4 sites of measurement. So just keep in mind, I want an 8-channel, I want to measure 6 channels. It's not that it's impossible, it's just not one of our standard offerings. The other part is our MyoScan Flex and our MyoScan Z. This ties to a raw signal. Why do I want a raw signal, you ask? There's additional metrics that are attached to that raw signal. The median frequency and the mean frequency are meaningful when we're trying to assess fatigue and when we're looking at which kind of fiber types are being dominant. So we have a tool that may These MyoScan Flex and MyoScan Zs are going to extend a little bit beyond the capabilities of the MyoScan Pros because they're going to provide more information. What value of that is going to depend on whether you actually need to look at those additional metrics or not. Obviously, from this, we can always, from our MyoScan Flex, from our raw signal, we always derive our RMS, so we're not limited to just this raw signal with those. The difference between the Flex and the Z is really one thing, and that's the Z has an impedance check feature. So if we have any researchers with us today, if they need to verify that they're getting good signal quality, we can generate a report on how much impedance is there with this sensor. So again, small details, but important when we look at this and we see this pile of equipment in front of us, and we're trying to decide what we really need. So we also have two dedicated EMG units. One is the MyoTrack Infinity, and the other is the MyoTrack 3. In the MyoTrack Infinity, you really have two options. You can have a home unit or a clinical unit, and you can have a unit with STIM or with no STIM. The difference between home and clinical is whether it runs on software. So we'll notice on this unit that we have we have a touch screen on here. We can run biofeedback and get some audio and visual feedback based on the threshold on the unit itself. So again, we don't necessarily need to be tethered to a computer with this unit. The client can have it with them. They could be getting the audio feedback through headphones, and they could be working on, say, their maximum contractions. Built into the unit are also some protocols that are going to be work-rest protocols with different ratios of work to rest that do a certain number of repetitions. So I don't want to say plug it in or hook them up to it and just let them go on their own, but you have the ability to kind of set them on a guided program and for the program to complete itself on the unit. And then STIM or no STIM is exactly what it sounds like. Do I want to be able to provide STIM or do I want to be able to not provide STIM? This MyoTrack Infinity is our only unit that does any STIM at all. So if I'm talking to you as a potential customer and you look and you say, I want to do STIM, that's going to be a unit I go to, and I say, you know, you may not have as many channels as you need of EMG, but you're going to have that STIM capability that you want. So obviously there's two kind of, I'll say, modalities on MyoTrack Infinity. There's STIM and EMG. There's also a third modality, and that's a combination of the two. So it's either alternating EMG STIM, where they're doing some sort of contraction and then getting the STIM, the impulses sent while they're resting, or there's EMG triggered STIM. So once they reach a threshold, they can get that STIM, or when they fall below the threshold, they can get the STIM as well. So kind of a new twist on the rehab side of things, integrating the EMG with the STIM to help the patients kind of attain whatever goal they're seeking, help them finish those contractions off. And then the other one is a MyoTrack 3 unit. This one's going to always plug into our computer. It's two EMG sensors, and the rehab suite is almost identical to that of the MyoTrack Infinity. There's a bit of a difference because the MyoTrack 3 has the RMS output. So internal sensors always connected to a computer, so you're going to have your two channels. You're able to run a lot of your same EMG assessments, your EMG trainings for those 5 categories we saw with the biofeedback. So there's a lot of capability in that little unit that's that may be kind of overlooked from time to time. And then our home trainers. We have two. One's the MyoTrack T4000. That's our top one. That is gray. The other one is our U-Control home unit. So that's for the pelvic floor, and they work very similarly. They're going to have a line of LED lights. There's going to be some sort of indication of a general contraction level. So we're not going to be able to get the objective data that we would see in Biograph, but it's enough for the home user to use, saying, I'm trying to get to this level, I'm getting to this level, and I'm getting some sort of feedback. Both have multiple feedback mechanisms, and our U-Control unit is going to also have some work-rest protocols as part of it. So again, home trainers, simple tools. So if you're seeing a client once a week, you can send them home with this unit and have them do another couple sessions, so they have 3 training sessions within a week instead of 1, and the recovery and their muscle function is going to be recovered to a normal level much quicker. So when we kind of set out on this, we said there are 3 questions: how many muscle sites, do you want peripheral measures, and what is your training environment? What we're going to do now is ask questions. Hopefully I answered I got your wheels turned about how to integrate, what to think about when you're calling thought technology and saying, hey Luke, I need the system. I don't know exactly what I need, but guide me. We can go through this, obviously go through this process together where we really narrow it down and we say, this is the best fit for you. For us here internally, it's not necessarily about selling you the 10-channel system with 10 sensors. It's about what's the best fit for you going to be, and is the software and the equipment going to be the tool you need to be in your clinic. So we're going to open up to questions now. If there are any, let me see. Chris, you can go ahead and ask your question. All right, well, if we have no more questions, kind of next steps, I'm very accessible via email or telephone. We're in Montreal, so we're on East Coast time and our standard hours from 9 to 5. Give me a call if we need to have further discussions about the equipment, about what's going to fit for you, or if you already have a system that's not quite doing what you want it to do. We can talk about how we can kind of make it a more capable tool for your clinic. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and we hope to hear from you very soon. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed a question before we log out. Gerard had a question about our EMG, our MyoScan Pro sensor. And it's the sensor settings for 400N, 1600W, and 400W. So for those of you who don't have equipment, on the front of the MyoScan Pro, there's a little switch with different settings on it. Whether we use 400 or 1600 is going to kind of depend on our muscle group. So 1600 is going to be our big muscles, think our quads, our glutes, that type of thing. Our 400 is going to be most everything else. And then the difference between the N and the W, the N is going to filter out heart rate. So if you're doing something on the torso, so maybe traps at some level, pectoral muscles, that type of thing, you'll want to be on that N, otherwise you're going to pick up some heart rate artifact. The 400W you can use for, say, the gastrocs and that type of thing. So it's gastrocs, forearms, that type of thing, where you don't need the super wide 1600 because the muscles aren't going to produce that strong of a contraction, and you don't need to worry about heart rate artifact. That's 400W. And then Bob, let's touch base back channel and we talk about what it would take to do that for you with the MyoScan Pros. We'll take a look at what system you have, and we'll go from there. All right. Again, we'll wrap up there. Please send me an email, give me a call. We'll talk more about what we can do with the system you have, or what kind of system you need. That's going to kind of be an added value to your clinic, because that's kind of our goal, to add an offering that you have that may separate you from some of the people you're working, some of your competitors. So with that, we will log off. Thank you again very much. Any other questions can be sent to me at lucas@thoughttechnology.com, or again, I could just be given a call and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.